Hey there, friends. Today we're going to talk about some new games that have already dropped in 2025. We've got co-op games, shooters, horror titles, and of course, single-player story-driven projects. So basically, there's something here for everyone. Don't skip around or you might miss something cool. Let's get started. Syberia Remastered. Let's kick things off with a nice treat for the old-school gamers. The cult classic point-and-click quest Syberia, created by Benoit Sakal, just got a new graphical upgrade. The devs didn't go full remake like they did with Mafia Definitive Edition. Instead, they just updated the textures to HD resolution, worked on the lighting and shadows, and made sure everything looks good on modern monitors. And honestly, it looks really cool. The only thing that bugged me was that they kept the cutscenes from the original, and they really stand out against the updated graphics. They only slightly touch them up, either with filters or maybe AI, but overall, the cutscenes look terrible. Maybe it's a tribute to the classic, or maybe it's just laziness. But when the video clips end and the gameplay kicks in, you can see that Kate looks different. Her clothes and the environment in general. Other than that, it's the legendary quest about uncovering the secrets of the genius Vorarlberg. I played this game to death as a kid, and coming back to this atmosphere felt incredibly nostalgic. The game's out on PC, PlayStation 5, and Xbox Series. And speaking of Xbox, there's another game, a much bigger one, that's closely tied to it. That's The Outer Worlds 2, which dropped at the end of last month. I don't think I need to explain that this is a pretty massive action RPG in an open world from Obsidian. By the way, it's already their second one this year. The first was Avowed, if I'm not mistaken, earlier this year. So let's say a few words about the game itself. The story of Part 2 takes place in a new location where conflict is brewing between local factions, each pursuing their own goals. And we, as always, play the role of someone called in to figure out what's going on and restore order. Unlike the first part, the second one puts a big emphasis on deep build variety. The skill system has been completely reworked. Instead of skill groups, each attribute now levels up independently, and over 90 unique perks encourage unconventional approaches like builds focused on kill bonuses. The world itself has become bigger and richer, and you'll want to carefully explore every location to find something useful, or stumble upon another side quest. Or just unlock new dialogue options, because it's an RPG after all. Visually, according to reviews, it turned out better than the first part, but personally I didn't really notice much difference. Maybe it's just a matter of taste and all that. Long story short, if you love big open-world games with tons of quests, activities, and progression, this is definitely a solid choice. Too bad we're not getting a second Fallout New Vegas, judging by what the devs have said. Escape from Duckov. I'm sure many of you know a game called Escape from Tarkov. You could say it's the parent of the extraction shooter genre. Well, recently a pretty funny parody of it came out, except instead of soldiers, we've got ducks. Yeah, another indie game that copies something more famous, though the core stays the same as in Tarkov, just with an isometric camera. You take control of a little duck and head into different zones for valuable loot, where you'll face regular enemies. Not players, though, this is actually a PvE mode. And in each run, the goal is not only to get out alive, but also to gather valuable resources that you can then sell to upgrade different skills and your equipment. Overall, it's not bad, but I think if there was an option to play co-op, and especially against other players, it'd probably be more interesting. But even as is, it plays nicely. No issues with servers crashing or excessive difficulty for newcomers. You can just sit down and have a good evening, and apparently that's enough for players, considering there are almost 1,000 positive reviews on Steam. Keeper. For fans of indie masterpieces with amazing visuals that still aren't on the radar of most gamers, something worthy came out this month too. And I'm talking about the game Keeper. This is a very atmospheric indie project that tells the story of a lighthouse that comes to life, magically grows legs, and sets off on a journey to a lonely mountain. Overall, as you'd expect from games like this, the whole story unfolds without any words, usually through the environment, design, and various metaphors, which isn't exactly new for this genre. By the way, the lighthouse doesn't travel alone. It's also helped by a seabird for finding different items or solving puzzles that you'll encounter along the way. But the main character has some tricks too. Since it's a lighthouse, its light affects the environment and scares off a sinister entity that wants to spread across the world. And you know what's sad? This studio has released other cool indie hits before, like the first two parts of Psychonauts. But since the publisher is Xbox or Microsoft, I guess nobody really bothered with proper marketing. And on Steam, the reviews are positive, but there's only like 300 of them, which is ridiculously low for such heartfelt games. If you, like me, love small indie games, I strongly recommend checking it out. Not just for the story, but for the stunning, colorful visuals and unique characters. Honestly, the second part of Vampire the Masquerade brings pretty mixed and conflicting emotions. After 6 years since its announcement, back in 2018 I think, it finally came out. If you don't remember, the first part is currently a real hit in terms of RPG games. But at launch, everything was pretty awful. Well, the situation with Part 2 isn't much better. Here, story-wise, we control an ancient vampire who wakes up from slumber and tries to figure out the twists, intrigues, and threats filling the city. That city, by the way, is Seattle. And yeah, if you didn't play the first part, here's a quick explanation. Vampires in this game live among regular humans, but despite their power, they can't feel like, masters of life because each of them must maintain the masquerade. A strict law about keeping the existence of vampires secret, violation of which is punished by death. Plus, the bloodsuckers themselves are divided into different clans, and we as the player can mix abilities from these different clans, creating unique builds for combat. You'll also be exploring Seattle, where the city is divided into 5 different regions, each with its own history, characters, and quests. And sure, it sounds like a typical modern open-world RPG, and that's exactly what it is modern. The soul of the original first part is nowhere to be found here, so whether to play it or not, well, decide for yourself, but visually it looks pretty cool. Probably one of the hottest games right now that I wanted to talk about as soon as possible, but I'm only getting around to recording this now, is Battlefield 6. True magnificence when it comes to multiplayer shooters, though. If you think about it, there's nothing mega drastically new in the game. They just finally gave players back everything that made the original games in the series great, but polished it up nicely, and as practice shows, it works damn well. The multiplayer of Part 6 is one of those rare places you want to come back to again and again, at least because it feels like real cinema. The level of destruction and everything else happening in this game. There's this meme like absolute cinema, and it perfectly describes almost every match. The game also has a single-player campaign, but it didn't turn out as mind-blowing as the multiplayer and was added more as a checkbox. However, if any of you were looking for a shooter with good set pieces for a couple evenings, why not play through it? Plus, at the time of writing this script, not only did they launch the first season, but apparently a separate new mode came out too. Basically a standard battle royale, which everyone's been sick of since Warzone days, so many people didn't appreciate it. And overall, I can understand why. Personally, I can't stand the battle royale genre and often skipped it in many games. But Battlefield 6 itself turned out phenomenal, and the peak online numbers on Steam, plus player reviews only confirm that. In October, a new part of Little Nightmares also came out, but as they say, there's one catch. The game was developed by completely different developers. Not the ones who made parts 1 and 2, but the guys who once gave the world Until Dawn. That's why Part 3, while not a bad game, is definitely weaker than the previous parts. Though the core concept of the game stayed in place, you're still told the story of 2 small children in a pretty creepy and scary world that they need to escape from. You can do this either solo or with a friend, but unfortunately only online. In one of my videos, I said you could do it on one screen. Well, sorry, that's unfortunately not true, and I accidentally spread misinformation. The gameplay formula stayed the same though. We move from point A to point B, solve various puzzles with an emphasis on co-op gameplay, sometimes fight or run away from different creepy monsters. By the way, their design is clearly good, and the same can be said about the locations. Dark and atmospheric, but in their own way, hauntingly beautiful. There's a certain vibe to games like Little Nightmares, kind of reminds you of, probably Tim Burton's work. So whether to check out the game or not, decide for yourself. As I said above, it's weaker than parts 1 and 2, which might scare off fans of the series, but if you haven't played and just wanted a dark co-op fairy tale with a story to get through in a couple evenings, then why not? RV, there yet? I'm sure each of you has imagined how cool it would be to buy your own RV and go on a road trip with friends. Well, you can perfectly realize all of the above in this new game on your screen. a game where you and your friends are returning home from a great vacation, but had to take a slightly different route that includes tons of various situations you'll need to find a way out of. In the game, you'll actively need to account for physics, use a winch to climb mountains or get out of some pit or cliff, while you need to stuff yourselves with burgers, drink cola and stuff, yelling at your teammates to coordinate them. And of course, dividing up responsibilities. One person plays the role of disaster driver, another flips burgers, the third fixes the vehicle, the fourth just screws around and entertains everyone. Honestly, I don't even know what could be better than gathering with a bunch of friends, driving beat-up jalopies, and just cursing at each other. Right now, the game is in early access, but already has around 2,500 positive reviews from players and a decent peak online count on Steam. So, if you've got people to gather with, I highly recommend spending your next weekend right here. Another pretty interesting and even somewhat very promising multiplayer project that came out at the end of October, but still deserves your attention, that's ARK Raiders. Essentially, it's another extraction shooter. By the way, not from just anyone, but from veterans at DICE. The game itself perfectly embodies the extraction shooter in its truest sense. Here, story-wise, the world has ended, and it's been taken over by mechanical invaders called the ARK. Well, basically like robots. We play the role of raiders who head to a specific point with a simple task: collect something valuable and return back. As you might guess, not only the aforementioned robots will get in our way, but also other raiders who are way more dangerous since they're real players. So you never know what exactly awaits you. Another firefight where one of you walks out alive and someone doesn't, or maybe you'll suddenly team up with another comrade on the battlefield and bring loot back to base. By the way, I'd especially like to praise the world design. This post-apocalyptic vibe in the spirit of the 80s and the Wild West looks amazing. Plus, the game pays really good attention to sound, which is extremely important in this genre. Almost every action makes noise that can attract unwanted attention. And the sound itself works as it should, so I recommend playing with good speakers. And there's also good old progression. Meaning, the more contracts you complete and valuable loot you bring, the more chances you have to level up stamina, reduce the volume of sounds when collecting items, or unlock access to new crafting stations. Basically a real addictive project. Also in October, a new Painkiller series game suddenly came out. And personally, I just didn't get it. Like, what is this? Don't get me wrong, I was never a fan of the series. But as a kid, I clearly remember playing a couple parts, and even back then the Painkiller series stuck with me. You know, as this dark shooter with hellish themes, gore, and brutality. I still remember playing one part that had a location like an abandoned orphanage, with ominous soundtrack, where first doors open, then some toy jumps out, and only then a bunch of monsters. I'm saying all this because this series has no shortage of darkness, but the new part looks more like some zoomer shooter with colorful visuals and a soundtrack made on a shoestring. Long story short, as a shooter you can play in co-op and destroy packs of demons in gothic purgatory, the game will do. Why they called it Painkiller is unclear. The essence, as you understand, stayed the same. We take control of one of 4 sinners and must stop the evil that wants to break free. All gameplay is built on shootouts with hordes of enemies and bosses, where there are about 7 types of weapons in the arsenal. Each has 2 types of attacks. If I'm not mistaken, in the original it was exactly the same. Plus there's character progression. By the way, it's funny, it happens through tarot cards that you find during playthrough. As a zoomer shooter with co-op and newfangled plastic graphics, well, maybe it'll work, but sadly, not as a Painkiller series game for sure. Let me suggest we step away again from failed AAA games and pay attention to segments that are way less noticeable but truly deserve your attention. For example, in October, a very colorful beat-em-up roguelike came out from the creators of the gorgeous Streets of Rage 4 called Absolum. The story setup is pretty simple and reminds you of the Streets of Rage series games, meaning the world has once again been captured by some tyrant and we must stop both him and his minions. You can do this either solo or, if you want, in co-op with friends up to 4 people. By the way, each hero is unique in their own way. One wields a sword, another a musket, the third magic, and the fourth is a master of hand-to-hand combat. At the same time, character synergy plays a pretty big role. Despite each having a unique fighting style, skill combinations help create a especially powerful strike series and magical moves. As for gameplay, I don't think there's much need to explain. We go from point A to point B and just kill everyone, both regular thugs and bosses, while admiring very beautiful locations. By the way, levels are randomly generated. After all, roguelike elements play their role here, creating some replayability and non-linearity. If you love these kind of bright beat-em-ups that you can zone out with alongside a couple friends, I highly recommend checking it out. Ninja Gaiden 4. Overall, this year has been pretty rich for the Ninja Gaiden series. Just think about it. Early in the year, a remake of Part 2 came out. Somewhere in summer, a pixel game in this series dropped. And now in October, even a full-fledged fourth part releases. So if you've been missing these slashers, this is definitely not the worst option, but let's take it step by step. Story-wise in the new part, the action unfolds in futuristic Tokyo, where we control a young ninja who must uncover their connection to the hero of the original parts. And yeah, he'll be playable too. Personally, this reminds me of, Devil May Cry 4, where you first had to play as Nero and then as Dante. Here I think it's pretty much the same. And yeah, the gameplay is totally familiar for this game series. You'll be slicing up your opponents as stylishly and brutally as possible, pulling off spectacular combos, blocking, parrying, and so on. Plus, there's pretty flexible difficulty settings, meaning if you're not familiar with the series, which, let me remind you, can sometimes be insanely difficult, here you can adjust it and customize the game for yourself. Maybe many won't like that, especially hardcore fans who are all about difficulty and such. But for a regular working person coming home from work who just wants to play, this is actually a pretty nice plus. Overall, if you love slashers, it's a good option in general. Considering that in a year, if you're lucky, maybe 2 of them come out at most. And even then, it's not guaranteed they'll be playable. Another interesting co-op gem this month is the game Misery. Kind of a very budget stalker where you can play with a couple friends up to 5 people. The gist is basically this. Playing with friends, you'll need to explore an exclusion zone in post-Soviet space. You've got villages, garages, vodka, and striped shirts. Basically everything in the familiar aesthetic. At the same time, despite the pretty simple visual style, there are plenty of mechanics in the game. There's loot, crafting, hunger, thirst, shelter building, trading, and a bunch of other stuff. Plus, considering the game, let's say, copies Stalker, yeah, all kinds of anomalies and emissions are in place. And it's like an indie project, but one that perfectly combines the atmosphere of hopelessness, some memes, and at the same time a well-realized team game. Like most small games of this type, it came out in early access, but judging by reviews, that's not really a problem. There aren't any mega serious bugs, and there's enough content for now, which is great. Tormented Souls II. Also among interesting and uniquely atmospheric story horror games this year, the second part of Tormented Souls came out. If you're not aware, the first part in its time was, let's say, a solid clone of Resident Evil, and the first parts of Silent Hill, which many enjoyed. Because you don't always have to reinvent the wheel from scratch, so the second one, you could say, is an ideological continuation of all the above. It's essentially a survival horror with fixed camera, where supplies are always scarce and there are tons of complex puzzles, plus an oppressive atmosphere. Story-wise, it continues the original. We once again control Caroline, who travels to a small town in southern Chile to visit a mysterious clinic to help her sister. And as you might guess, this clinic is a real hell. The gameplay formula is simple but works, and is surprisingly connected to switching between multiple dimensions. Actions in the other world change the past of the real universe, allowing you to influence what's happening around you. Basically, something similar was in The Medium, if you played it. At the same time, you'll have to fight enemies using improvised weapons. Like a chainsaw or nail gun, those are your main allies on this difficult journey. And for, let's say, modern gamers, the game supports flexible difficulty settings. From the good old mode with limited saves and tank controls like in old games like Resident Evil, all the way to a simplified version for less experienced players. MIMESIS. And let's finish with another co-op for a group of friends. In October, several interesting indie games came out where you can realize this fully. So, for example, in front of you now is another Lethal Company clone, or Repo, a co-op horror where enemy AI copies your friend's behavior, right down to their voice and phrases. The idea itself is this. Playing co-op up to 4 people, the task is to fix a tram using scrap found on the level. Sounds pretty simple overall, except that all kinds of monsters roam the locations. They can copy voices, movements, even teammates' memories to divide the team and eliminate everyone one by one. And yeah, enemies don't just stupidly repeat your phrases, they remember them specifically in different situations. And if the first time a dummy probably won't fool you, well, the longer you play, it's possible that by the third or fourth attempt you'll believe it. Too bad though, the game itself is still rough. It came out as is classic for these co-op horrors in early access and has some bugs. But overall, to brighten up a couple evenings with friends, it's definitely a good option.